What happens when one simple human gesture turns an entire space station upside down? And why did 30 young alien engineers suddenly believe they had discovered the key to winning their instructor's heart? These are questions Commander Kira Velthos never thought she would need to answer when she woke up that morning on Orbital Academy 17, the most prestigious engineering training facility in the Velari Collective. A station suspended in the golden glow between two binary stars, where thousands of young minds came to learn the art of creation and innovation. Kira stretched her slender fingers across the holographic display in her quarters, reviewing the day's schedule, her silver-white hair cascading over her shoulders like liquid moonlight, catching the ambient light and shimmering with each subtle movement. Her delicate, pointed ears twitched slightly as she detected the elevated heartbeats of her students gathering 3 floors below. They were excited about something, more excited than usual, and that fact alone made her suspicious. At 24 cycles, Kira was the youngest senior instructor the Academy had ever appointed, a fact that brought her equal measures of pride and pressure. Her luminescent skin glowing faintly blue as her stress levels subtly increased. She pulled on her fitted tactical pants and adjusted her sleek charcoal uniform jacket, the fabric designed for both comfort and durability, featuring the silver insignia of the engineering corps on her left shoulder. Her large, expressive eyes, the color of storm clouds touched by lightning, studied her reflection briefly before she turned away, her mind already racing through contingency plans for whatever chaos her students had concocted this time. The Velari were known throughout the galaxy for their technological prowess, their perfect vision that could detect microscopic imperfections, and their culture of relentless efficiency. But Kira had always been different from her peers. Where other Velari saw only data and optimization, she felt things deeply, inconveniently, wonderfully, and she had learned to hide this perceived weakness behind a mask of cool professionalism. Today, however, that mask would be tested in ways she never anticipated. The morning briefing had been simple enough. A delegation from Earth was arriving for the first cultural and technological exchange between humans and the Velari Collective. Kira remembered reading the file on the visitors: 3 human engineers led by Dr. Elena Reyes, described as brilliant, adaptable, and surprisingly resilient for such a fragile species. The Velari Council had been hesitant to allow humans on the station, citing concerns about their primitive technology and emotional volatility. But the High Chancellor had overruled them in the interest of diplomatic progress. Kira had been assigned to supervise the visit, a task she accepted with professional detachment, even as curiosity flickered in the depths of her storm-gray eyes. She had never met a human before. Her only knowledge came from data archives and cultural studies, which described them as chaotic, inefficient, and prone to making decisions based on something called gut feeling. How any species survived relying on their digestive organs for guidance remained a mystery to her. Yet there was something in the way the reports described their creativity, their stubborn refusal to accept impossible odds, that resonated with the part of herself she kept carefully hidden. As she walked toward the main hangar bay, her soft-soled boots making no sound against the polished floors, she could hear the excited chatter of her students growing louder. 30 cub engineers, ranging from 12 to 16 cycles, had gathered near the viewing windows, their pointed ears all oriented toward the approaching shuttle, like a field of flowers turning toward the sun. Kira paused at the entrance to the bay, observing her students with a mixture of fondness and exasperation. Phoenix, her most promising but also most troublesome student, was already calculating thrust vectors and speculating loudly about how humans manage space travel without Velari-grade navigation systems. Little Mira, the youngest of the group, pressed her small hands against the glass, her golden eyes wide with wonder. These cubs represented the future of the collective, and Kira felt the weight of that responsibility settle across her shoulders like a familiar cloak. The human shuttle docked with a series of mechanical clunks and hisses that made every Velari ear in the room twitch with displeasure and inefficient. They all thought simultaneously, though none voiced it aloud. Kira straightened her posture and stepped forward as the airlock cycled open, revealing 3 figures silhouetted against the harsh interior lighting of the human vessel. The first to emerge was Dr. Elena Reyes herself, a woman of medium height with warm brown skin and dark hair pulled back in a practical style. She wore simple gray clothing, functional, Kira noted approvingly, and carried herself with quiet confidence. Behind her came 2 colleagues, But Kira's attention was immediately captured by the second figure, a tall man with broad shoulders and kind eyes the color of aged copper. He wore thin rectangular frames across his face, and Kira found herself momentarily confused by their purpose until she accessed her cultural database and realized with some surprise that humans required external devices to correct their vision. How remarkable, she thought. How terribly inconvenient, yet somehow endearing. The man's name, according to her files, was Marcus Chen, a mechanical engineer specializing in adaptive systems. He moved with an easy grace that seemed at odds with his species' reputation for clumsiness. And when his eyes met Kira's across the hangar bay, something electric passed between them, a current of curiosity and recognition that made her breath catch unexpectedly. She dismissed the sensation as atmospheric adjustment and stepped forward to formally greet the delegation. "Welcome to Orbital Academy 17, she said, her voice carrying the melodic undertones characteristic of her species. "I am Commander Kira Velthos. I will be your guide and supervisor during your stay, Doctor." Reyes smiled warmly and extended her hand in what Kira recognized as a human greeting gesture. The touch was brief but surprisingly pleasant, and Kira noted that human skin temperature ran several degrees warmer than Velari normal. Behind her, the 30 cub engineers had fallen into unusual silence, their enhanced senses cataloging every detail of the visitors with intense focus. The tour began without incident, Kira leading the delegation through the primary engineering bays while explaining the station's systems in carefully simplified terms. The cubs followed at a respectful distance, their curiosity barely contained, occasionally whispering observations to one another in frequencies they believed the humans couldn't hear. What they didn't realize was that Marcus Chen had spent years studying Velari communication patterns, and the slight quirk of his lips suggested he understood far more than they assumed. Kira found herself stealing glances at him throughout the tour, intrigued by the way he listened, not with the analytical detachment of her own people, but with genuine wonder that transformed his features each time she revealed a new technological marvel. They had reached the central observation deck, a vast circular space with transparent walls that offered an unobstructed view of the binary stars outside. When the incident occurred, Dr. Reyes was asking about the station's power generation systems, and as Kira began her explanation, she noticed Marcus remove his glasses, produce a small cloth from his pocket, and begin carefully wiping the lenses in slow, methodical circles. It was such a small gesture, so utterly mundane, that Kira almost didn't register it at first. But behind her, 30 pairs of enhanced eyes had locked onto the action with sudden, intense focus. To the cubs, who had never seen anything like it, the gesture was mesmerizing. The way Marcus held the frames up to the light, inspecting them for imperfections, the careful precision of his movements, the obvious care he took with what they perceived as a piece of vital equipment, it all spoke to values the Velari held sacred: engineering, maintenance, attention to detail. And then Phoenix, brilliant, troublesome Phoenix, whispered to the cub beside him, in a voice that carried further than he intended, "He's performing maintenance on his optical enhancement device. Did you see the technique? This is clearly an advanced human engineering ritual. We must study it and improve upon it to impress Commander Velthos." Kira heard every word, her ears twitching with a mixture of alarm and reluctant amusement. She opened her mouth to correct the misunderstanding, but before she could speak, the first cub had already darted away, followed quickly by another, then 5 more. Then the entire group of 30 young engineers, racing toward their various workshops with the single-minded determination that only adolescent Velari could muster. The next 3 hours descended into a level of chaos that Kira had never experienced in her entire career. The cubs, each desperate to impress their beloved instructor, had launched into a competition to create improved versions of what they called optical enhancement maintenance systems. Phoenix led a team that developed a self-cleaning lens coating using nanobotic technology, accidentally causing it to become sentient and develop an existential crisis about its purpose in existence. Little Mira, not to be outdone, had attempted to create a cleaning cloth with enhanced friction properties, only to produce a material so effective at removing particles that it stripped the protective coating from every surface it touched, including the floor of the materials lab. Another group had decided that the problem with human glasses was that they required manual cleaning at all, and had begun designing orbital micro-drones that would follow the wearer and maintain their eyewear. automatically a project that resulted in 17 tiny machines escaping into the ventilation system and declaring themselves an independent colony. The station's alarm systems had activated no fewer than 4 times, each triggered by a different Cub-initiated disaster. And Kira found herself racing from crisis to crisis with growing desperation, while Marcus Chen followed behind her, alternating between genuine apology and barely concealed laughter. "I'm so sorry," he said for the 15th time, as they watched a hazmat team contain Phoenix's sentient lens coating, which had started composing poetry about the futility of cleanliness. "I had no idea that wiping my glasses would cause all this." Kira pinched the bridge of her nose, a gesture she had unknowingly adopted from human media files she sometimes reviewed for cultural research. "This is not your fault," she admitted, though her voice carried an edge of exhaustion. "My students are passionate about engineering, sometimes excessively so." Marcus stepped closer, and Kira became acutely aware of his presence, the warmth radiating from his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "They're trying to impress you," he observed quietly. "All of this chaos, it's because they want you to be proud of them." The observation struck Kira with unexpected force. She had been so focused on damage control that she hadn't stopped to consider the motivation behind her students' actions. They weren't just competing with each other. They were demonstrating their skills to her, offering their best work in hopes of earning her approval. The realization made something warm and unfamiliar bloom in her chest. The situation reached its critical point approximately 6 hours after the glasses wiping incident. A team of older Cubs, determined to outdo their younger counterparts, had decided to create a revolutionary cleaning solution using compounds from the station's experimental chemistry stores. Their calculations had been flawless on paper, but they had failed to account for the interaction between their solution and the station's atmospheric processing system. Kira was in the middle of a conversation with Dr. Reyes about Velari educational philosophy when every alarm on the station activated simultaneously, and a calm automated voice announced that a caustic gas was spreading through the ventilation network, with an estimated 23 minutes until critical exposure levels were reached. The reaction was immediate. Civilians and non-essential personnel began evacuating toward the emergency pods while engineering teams scrambled to contain the breach. Kira's storm-gray eyes darkened as she processed the situation, her mind racing through solutions at incredible speed. The gas could be neutralized, but it required a specific procedure to be executed at 3 different points in the ventilation system simultaneously, and most of the senior engineers were currently managing the evacuation. She would need to handle this herself, but she was only one person, and the clock was counting down with merciless precision. "I can help," Marcus said, appearing at her side with a tablet displaying the station's ventilation schematics. Kira blinked at him, surprise momentarily overriding her crisis management protocols. "You're not authorized to access those files," Marcus shrugged, a gesture she had learned indicated casual dismissal of obstacles. "I asked Dr. Reyes to request them from your council. They were reluctant, but she can be very persuasive when lives are at stake. Now, I've studied your atmospheric systems during the tour, and I think I understand the neutralization procedure. If you can get me to Junction 7, I can handle that node while you take Junction 12 and 15. It was audacious, presumptuous, and completely contrary to every protocol the Velari Collective held sacred. No human should have access to their systems. No outsider should be trusted with such critical operations. But as Kira looked into Marcus Chen's copper-colored eyes, she saw something that transcended species and culture, a genuine desire to help, a willingness to risk his own safety for people he had just met, and a quiet competence that spoke louder than any credential. Against every instinct drilled into her by years of training, Kira made a decision based on something she had never trusted before, her gut feeling. "Junction 7 is this way," she said, already moving. "Try to keep up." What followed was a synchronized dance of engineering brilliance that would later become legendary among both human and Velari communities. Kira and Marcus worked in perfect tandem, communicating through hastily established radio links, their different approaches to problem-solving complementing each other in ways neither had anticipated. Where Kira's methods were precise and methodical, following optimal procedures with mechanical perfection, Marcus improvised constantly, adapting to unexpected variables with creative solutions that made her simultaneously impressed and horrified. At one point, When his designated valve refused to respond to standard commands, he literally kicked it while simultaneously rerouting power through an auxiliary circuit using nothing but a piece of wire and what he called aggressive optimism. It shouldn't have worked. Every engineering principle Kira knew suggested it would fail catastrophically. Instead, the valve snapped open at the exact moment needed, and Marcus's section of the neutralization procedure completed successfully. By the time they reached junction 15 together, the final point, which required both of them due to a complication in the original plan, they had developed a rhythm of communication that felt almost telepathic. Kira made calculations. Marcus made adjustments. She identified problems. He suggested unconventional solutions. They argued, agreed, and compromised, all within the space of seconds, as the countdown reached its final minutes. The last valve was stuck, corroded by the very gas they were trying to neutralize, and no amount of force would move it. Kira felt despair creeping into her heart as the timer dropped below 5 minutes. If they couldn't complete this final step, the entire procedure would fail, and hundreds of people would suffer the consequences. "There has to be something," she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time since the crisis began. "There has to be a way." Marcus Chen looked at her then, and in his warm copper eyes she saw not fear, but absolute certainty. "There is," he said. "We need to change our perspective. The valve won't open because we're trying to force it against resistance. But what if we eliminate the resistance first?" He explained his idea quickly. Use the cleaning solution from his glasses cloth, which contained mild solvents that could break down the corrosion without damaging the valve mechanism. It was ridiculous. It was brilliant. It was exactly the kind of solution that defied Velari logic while somehow achieving perfect results. Kira watched as Marcus pressed his small cloth against the corroded valve joint, working the fabric into the crevices with patient determination. Seconds stretched into eternities. The timer continued its descent for minutes. 3 minutes, 2. Kira's heart hammered against her ribs, an emotional response she couldn't control, and she found herself silently praying to stars she had studied but never worshipped. When the valve finally shuddered and began to move, she almost didn't believe it. Marcus threw his weight against it, pushing with every ounce of strength in his human frame, and Kira joined him without hesitation, her slender hands gripping the metal beside his. Together, they forced the valve open. Together, they watched the neutralization compound flood through the system. Together, they stood in silence as the station's alarm systems went quiet one by one, replaced by the gentle hum of normal operations resuming. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They stood in the cramped maintenance junction, breathing hard, covered in grime and chemical residue, and Kira became aware that her hand was still pressed against Marcus's on the valve wheel. His skin was warm, so warm, and she could feel his pulse beating steady and strong beneath her fingertips. "We did it," Marcus breathed, turning to look at her with wonder in his eyes. "We actually did it." Kira meant to respond with something professional, something appropriately measured and Velari. Instead, she heard herself laugh, a bright, genuine sound that she hadn't made since childhood, a sound that seemed to surprise Marcus as much as it surprised her. "Yes," she agreed, her storm gray eyes shining with something that might have been tears or might have been starlight reflected from the viewing port nearby. "We did." In that moment, suspended between crisis and relief, Kira understood something fundamental about the universe. The Velari way was not wrong. Efficiency and logic had their place, and always would. But the human way was not wrong either. Creativity, intuition, the willingness to kick a valve when calculations failed, these were not weaknesses to be corrected but strengths to be embraced. And perhaps, just perhaps, the greatest engineering achievements would come not from one species or the other, but from both working together, combining their unique perspectives into something greater than either could achieve alone. The aftermath of the crisis brought unexpected developments. The 30 Cub engineers, upon learning that their competition had nearly destroyed the station, were initially devastated beyond comfort. Little Mira cried for 3 hours straight, convinced she had ruined everything, until Kira gathered all of them in the main assembly hall and delivered a speech that would be remembered for generations. "Today you made mistakes," she told them, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast room. "Serious mistakes with serious consequences. But today you also reminded me why I became an engineer in the first place. Not for efficiency, not for optimization, but for the joy of creation, the thrill of discovery, and the desire to make something that matters. You saw a simple human gesture and found wonder in it. You took that wonder and tried to improve upon it. The execution was flawed, catastrophically flawed, but the impulse was pure. Never lose that impulse. Never stop seeing wonder in the ordinary. Just perhaps next time, check with your instructor before attempting to revolutionize atmospheric chemistry. The cubs laughed through their tears. And Phoenix, whose sentient lens coating had been safely deactivated and archived for future study, raised his hand tentatively. Commander Velthos? The human with the optical enhancement devices. He helped save the station, didn't he? Kira's eyes found Marcus in the back of the room, where he stood with Dr. Reyes and their colleague, watching the proceedings with quiet respect. Yes, she confirmed. Engineer Chen demonstrated exceptional skill, adaptability, and bravery. He is a credit to his species and a welcome guest in our facility. What? She didn't say. What she kept locked carefully behind her professional mask was that Marcus Chen had also demonstrated something far more personal. He had shown her that it was possible to be logical and creative, efficient and passionate, alien and human, all at once. He had made her laugh when laughter felt impossible. He had held her hand on a valve wheel in a moment of triumph that she would remember for the rest of her life. The cultural exchange program was extended by unanimous vote of the Velari Council, a decision that surprised no one who had witnessed the events of that remarkable day. Dr. Reyes began collaborating with senior instructors on hybrid engineering curricula, while the third member of the human delegation established a cultural studies program that helped young Velari understand human customs without accidentally interpreting them as engineering challenges. As for Marcus Chen, he was invited to become a visiting instructor at Orbital Academy 17, a position he accepted with characteristic enthusiasm. His first official class covered the topic of adaptive problem solving in crisis situations and featured a detailed analysis of how a simple glasses cleaning cloth had helped save 300 lives. The cubs adored him. They hung on his every word, bombarded him with questions about human engineering, philosophy, and competed even more fiercely than before this time, to impress both their instructors equally. Kira found herself spending more and more time in Marcus's company, initially under the guise of ensuring his proper integration into Velari academic culture. They discussed engineering principles during long walks through the station's observation corridors. They debated the relative merits of logic versus intuition over cups of synthesized tea. They watched the binary stars set and rise through transparent walls, standing close enough that their shoulders sometimes touched, and neither of them ever stepped away. On the evening of the 40th day since the humans' arrival, Marcus found Kira alone on the uppermost observation deck, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her luminescent skin casting soft blue light into the surrounding darkness. She was holding something in her hands, his glasses cloth, carefully preserved since the crisis, now mounted in a small display case. The cubs wanted to create a memorial, she explained without turning around, her voice soft with emotion she no longer tried to hide. Something to commemorate the day that changed everything. Phoenix suggested a statue. Mira wanted a fountain. But I thought, this seemed more appropriate. A reminder that the greatest achievements don't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes they come from simple things. A moment of maintenance. A small kindness. A willingness to share something of yourself with strangers who might not understand it at first. Marcus moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth despite the cool station air. You understand it now though, he said quietly. Don't you? Kira finally turned to face him, her storm gray eyes meeting his copper gaze with vulnerability she had never shown another being. I understand more than I ever expected, she admitted. I understand that efficiency without creativity is merely function without purpose. I understand that different perspectives create stronger solutions. And I understand, she paused, gathering courage from some reserve she hadn't known she possessed. I understand that sometimes the most logical course of action is to follow your heart, even when it leads somewhere unexpected. The moment stretched between them, filled with possibility and promise. Marcus Chen, human engineer with kind eyes and gentle hands, smiled at Kira Velthos, Velari commander with storm cloud eyes and starlight hair. And somewhere in the vastness of space, two binary stars continued their eternal dance, caring nothing for the small miracles unfolding in their glow. And in the engineering dormitories of Orbital Academy 17, 30 cub engineers pressed their pointed ears against windows and walls. listening with enhanced senses to every word, every heartbeat, every whispered hope. They had started this journey trying to impress their beloved instructor, but they had discovered something far more valuable along the way. They had discovered that the universe was vast and full of wonder, that different species could work together to achieve the impossible, and that love in all its logical, illogical glory was perhaps the greatest engineering challenge of all. The stars continued to shine, the station continued to spin, and somewhere on a small blue planet called Earth, a factory continued to manufacture simple cleaning cloths, completely unaware that one of its humble products had helped spark a revolution in intergalactic relations. Some stories, after all, begin not with explosions or declarations, but with the quiet sound of cloth against glass, and the infinite possibilities that follow when different worlds choose to see each other clearly for the very first time.